Hi there, I'm Jill Finley from Jillily Studio, and I'm delighted to be here in the Riley Blake Studios to share with you my applique method. And I call it Appliqué the Jillily Way, but basically it's a prepared edge method that gives you beautiful results, even for beginners. And when you're thinking about an applique project, here I've got a little table runner here that shows my applique, and you can get really nice results with this method. And there's not a big, huge learning curve like there is with some of the other methods. This happens to be a little project called Tangled Daisies. The pattern's available on my website, and it uses my new collection of fabric, which is Sunny Skies, which is a collection of blues and yellows with a couple of greens, and this is a lovely collection. So I'm going to set this aside, and let's get started on my applique method. Now the block we're going to work on today is from my bramble quilt, which is shown in the back here, and that quilt has four blocks that are appliqued. They're all the same, and that's what we're going to work on today, just so I can teach you this method. To start with, I want to share with you that I have a collection of all of the tools I use for applique in my applique set. And so let me show you what I've got here. There's little instructions here that will remind you what you learned today. And it also has my quilter's digit, my starch brush, applique glue, polka dots, and my favorite needles, my Bowen needles. And those are all in my applique set. Those are the tools that I'm going to use as I'm preparing my applique shapes. And the next thing I'm going to need is my maker paper. And maker paper is a product that I've developed. It is a heavyweight freezer paper. Let me show you a single sheet. There's a sheet, and it's heavier than regular grocery store freezer paper, and it comes in the 8.5 by 11 sheet, so you can put it right through your printer and print out the shapes that you get from whatever pattern you're working on, and that way you don't have to trace. But if you do need to trace, you can see through it to trace through a single layer. And then I'll take, I've got 2 layers here. I'll take 2 layers to my ironing surface. And this paper has a shiny coated side, which is a plastic side, and then a regular paper side. When you put it through your printer, an inkjet printer, make sure you put it so that you print on the paper side, not on the plastic side. And that way you'll be able to cut your shapes out. Now I will layer 2 pieces together and put them on my ironing surface and press. And I'll just press this until it sticks to my ironing board, and those 2 pieces of paper will stick together. This will just give me a little bit heavier material to make my template. The reason I do this is because I can reuse this template many times because it's heavier and it'll stand up a little better. You can use a single layer, but if I'm almost always reusing this template, then I double it up. So now I've peeled it off my ironing surface, and I have a nice heavyweight material. You can see that those are bonded together. And that's what I've cut my template out of right here. So I've got a little template already cut, and I'm going to place it on this little piece of fabric. And I put it on the wrong side of the fabric with the shiny side facing down. And I like to kind of place it on the bias. And it's not necessary, but I think it looks nice. And I'll just press that until it sticks. Now the bond that you get with this paper is just a temporary bond. It holds it in place long enough for you to do your prep work. And then I'll take my scissors and cut around the shape, leaving myself about a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now at the bottom, this shape happens to have a dotted line. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a dotted line there, which means I don't need any seam allowance on that edge because it's going to go underneath another piece. So I've just cut that right off. And that's ready for me to turn those edges under. Now a 1/4 inch seam allowance is important because if you get your seam too big, it's a little awkward and hard to work with. And if you cut your seams too skinny, it's really hard to turn that edge. So the next thing we use is our starch brush. And I'm going to take a container and put a little bit of starch in it. This is a liquid starch, so I'm just going to pour some in. But you can use any brand of starch, any kind. If you want to just spray it in, you can use the big starch in the big bottle, or you can use magic sizing, any type of pressing aid that will hold a crease is what you need. So I've got a little bit of starch in the bottom of this cup, and I take my starch brush and just moisten the edge of this seam allowance. And that's going to get that nice and wet so that when I press this edge, it will stay. And I'll use my iron on the hottest setting, and then I'll just push this edge up over the top of the edge of my template. I'm using my quilter's digit. I've got that in my left hand and my iron in my right hand. And as I move around the shape, I can kind of manipulate the fabric with this digit under the iron so that I don't get burned. I'll turn this around. See how the edge of the iron just kind of gathers the fabric up over the template? It kind of eases it around that corner. I like to use the side of my iron. At home, I sometimes use my big iron because it has a big surface area and it makes me really fast. And I just leave my iron there long enough for that starch to dry. And now my applique shape is prepared. And you can see that I have a little bit of a flag that sticks out. Wherever you have a point, you will have a flag of extra fabric. Just leave that, don't cut it off. If you cut it off, you'll have frayed edges and it's hard to deal with. But if you have a nice long flag, it's really easy to tuck under. When we get to that, I'll show you that a little bit later. Now that this is cooled off, I can remove my template and I can use that again, and my shape is ready to be attached to my block. I'm just going to set it aside here because I've got a couple others that I want to attach as well. There's another shape in this block, and it's cut out, so we'll just put it on there, put the template on the wrong side of the fabric and press it. See, I've got that on the wrong side. And then I use my starch brush once again to apply a little starch to this seam allowance, and my quilter's digit in my left hand, and then I'm going to take my iron and push that edge up over the top of the template. As I move around this curved shape, I pull that fabric towards my iron and around the template nice and tight. And I leave that iron there long enough for that to dry, the starch, so that the crease doesn't come undone. You can kind of see how I'm working around this shape, and I just kind of slide my digit toward me and tuck that fabric under my iron as I go. Let's turn this around this way. Okay, now that looks like that's all dry. Nice. That shape's all ready. Wait for that to cool off a little bit and then pull the template out. We can use that again many times. I find that I can reuse the templates about 6 to 10 times before they start getting wobbly, and then that's ready to go. Let's see. Now that I've prepared my shapes, let's go to the block. And remember, we were working on this bramble quilt. Here's the pattern. And in the pattern is a placement diagram, a full-size placement diagram. And I'm going to take this to my light box here and place it on my light box. Turn that on. And then I've started the block here. You can see I've got some of it started. But in order to hold everything in place so it doesn't shift around while I'm working, I'm going to use these little magnets. Okay, now the next product we're going to use, we've already used the starch brush and the quilter's digit, and now we're going to use the Appliqué glue. And we're going to use this to hold our pieces down to the block until we can get around to stitching. I'm going to set this iron aside because it's really hot. Okay, now the Appliqué glue comes like this. This is an archival quality glue. It's acid-free, pH neutral, safe to leave in your quilt, but it is water soluble. It's really a nice product because it will keep the pieces in place for a long time. If you don't get around to stitching right away, like me sometimes it might be, I don't know, months before I get that block stitched. So it's nice to have a product that's going to hold them in place really nicely. And it comes with a storage cap like this, and you just twist that storage cap off. And then the tip is in this little baggie. So I'll pull it off here, and we'll twist the taper tip, on top of that lid. And this is a nylon tip so that the glue won't stick to it. It won't clog, which is really nice because the glue has the tip has a wide base and a really thin top. So that allows you to deliver a really small drop of glue because you don't need very much. It's very, very sticky. And because it's got a wide base and the skinny top, it allows air up in there so it doesn't create a vacuum like the really skinny, thin cylinders that are just straight. And that way, the glue can drain back down into the bottle and you won't have clogs. After you're done, you can unscrew your top and rinse it out and you will never have any clogs. It's really nice. It has a little cap that you keep on it so that it doesn't dry out. You can replace the storage cap if you want, but I almost never do. I just leave the red cap on to prevent dry out. So I'm going to take that cap off, and then I'll put some drops of glue, let's put it right here so you can see it, on the seam allowance of my prepared shape. Just a tiny drop of glue here, about every 1/2 inch to inch in the seam allowance only. Okay, and I don't, remember I've got this flag here at the tip. Don't put any glue by the tip because you're going to need to tuck that under. So let's go over here and I'll just glue this down right where it goes. And then I've got this little detail piece, remember we did, and a little drop of glue here. And that goes right here in the center. And I've already prepped this little circle that goes on top of them. I'm not going to do the whole block just so that you can get the idea. That's going to cover all those raw edges and glue that in place. So when I get the whole block down, I will glue these leaves down and the other couple petals and create the whole block. This is going, like I said, is going to hold in place. Let me hold it up for you and show you. It's going to stay in place nicely until I am ready to stitch. And even though I just barely glued that, it's very sticky. It's going to hold there. And then I'll stitch by hand, but you can do this method and stitch by machine. You can do a little decorative stitch or a zigzag or anything that, let me turn this off, anything that will hold those pieces in place. I prefer to stitch by hand, and there are other videos that show my stitching method. Riley Blake has one on their website that shows me stitching, and there are several videos on my website as well that teach you the applique method and the stitching method. I have some online classes on my website that teach you more detail about this method, how to do circles, how to do all the different shapes, how to make the vines with the bias tape maker. And that's a little class that you can buy right on my website, and the same thing with the stitching. But before we leave, I want to show you about that little flag there. Remember, we have this flag that's sticking out. Pretend this is my needle. I'll stitch down this side, and when I get to this flag, I'll just grab the flag and tuck it underneath. Grab it and tuck it, and then stitch down. It's really easy to do. Here's another one. Grab it. Just with your needle, you kind of poke it and tuck it under. If you're going to stitch by machine, make sure you tuck under all your flags first. Put a little drop of glue there to hold it so that when you're under your needle on your machine, you don't have to stop. So that's the prep method for my applique. I hope that you enjoyed that, and let's talk about, just before we leave, quickly all of the items in my applique set. The starch brush, which I use to put the starch on the seam allowance, the quilter's digit, which I use to manipulate the fabric under my iron, and then we haven't talked, the glue, applique glue, which we use to glue everything down. And the last two items in my applique set are for stitching. And this is a polka dot. First of all, I use a polka dot whenever I'm hand sewing. It's a sticky thimble you put on your finger wherever you need to push it, the back of your needle, so that you don't get poked. And if you don't know where it goes, stitch for a minute and you'll know right where to put it. And the second thing is my Bowen needles, which is a size 11 applique needle. And that gives me really lovely results. So I wish you luck with your applique. Try something new, get out there and give it a whirl, and visit JilliliStudio.com. Thank you.